Hello Stampers, welcome to the craft room. Today I want to show you how to make these great little flowers. I think they look a bit like marigolds using your scallop circle punch. So let's get started. What we're going to use for this particular flower are 3 punched out pieces of cardstock. Here I'm using Concord Crush, Not Quite Navy, and Baja Breeze. So we're going to be making the flower that looks like this. The first thing we want to do with your 3 scallop circles is actually run them through the crimper. Why we're doing this is to just break down the fibers to make the cardstock a little bit easier to work with. So first you're going to run it through one way, and then you're going to go ahead and run it through perpendicular to the way that you just ran it through. So again, just breaking down those fibers. Okay, great. Now we're going to take the first layer, which for us is going to be the Concord Crush layer. You're just going to take your paper snips and snip it right into the center. And you don't have to worry about exactly where the center is. This technique is pretty forgiving, so you're okay just eyeballing it. And then what we're going to do is start to kind of bend this cardstock, and what you want to do is overlap 2 petals with 2 petals, and we're going to use our crystal effects to adhere that together. And just hold that in place until it dries, and then we're just going to go ahead and set that aside. Our second layer is going to be our Not Quite Navy layer, and for this layer what we want to do is cut away 3 of the petals. So again, you're going to cut right into the center and then count 3 petals, 1, 2, 3, and just cut away those 3 petals. And now the same thing here, we're going to start to curl this cardstock into a cone shape, and again overlap 2 of those petals and adhere them with crystal effects. So that's our second layer. Now we're going to move on to our third layer. We're going to use our Baja Breeze cardstock, and for this one we're going to cut away 5 of the petals. So again, cutting into the center and then counting 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then cutting those 5 away. Again, go ahead and hold on to those because we are going to use them later, and you already know how to do this. This is a little bit tougher because it's getting a little bit smaller, but you just want to kind of bend that cardstock a bit, and once again we're overlapping 2 of those petals, and we're going to go ahead and use our crystal effects to adhere those together. Okay, so now we've got those 3, I guess we could call them cones, and we're also going to need some smaller layers. You can see on this flower we've got 1, 2, 3, and now we've got 4 and 5 to do. So we're going to just set those dark ones aside, and we're going to move on to the Baja Breeze. For this one, what you want to do is cut off 1 of the petals. Do it carefully because we're going to need that 1 petal. And now what you're going to want to do is cut off this tip of these petals. So just cut that right off. This is going to make this a lot easier to maneuver, and we're going to try to curl this up, and this time we're just overlapping 1 petal with 1 petal. So we're making a little center that's going to have 3 petals. So use your crystal effects to just go ahead and adhere 1 petal to 1 petal like that. And for this last one, what we're going to do is we're also going to cut off the bottom, and you're going to need a couple of skewers. I have a larger skewer and also a smaller skewer, and I picked these up I think at a grocery store. I think these are used for shish kebabs. What you want to do is curl this top petal back. So it's now curled back. Hopefully you can see that. And then we're going to use this thin skewer to come in and just fold that petal. We're trying to just bend that petal, and that's going to act as the center of our flower. And we can just set that aside for now. So the next step, what we need to do with all of these layers is come in here and snip all of these petals. And you're just going in about, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch. And why we're doing this is we're going to want to be folding back, rolling back each of these petals to give this flower a little bit of life. So go ahead and cut in on all of your layers. This one, and this one, and even this tiny 3 one. Be careful with this one that you don't cut too far in and lose some of your petals. And I'm going to do that and I'll be right back. Okay, once you have each of your petals cut in between, you're going to want to take your larger skewer and we're just rolling back each of these petals. So using your finger, using the skewer to kind of curl that petal back. And again, you're going to do this to each layer of the flower. So you want to do it to every single layer, including the small 3 one. I'm going to do that and I'll be right back. So now you can see I've rolled back all of my petals. So now it's time to assemble our flower together. So for this bottom layer, you'll notice you've got a little bit of a peak here. You don't have to cut that off. You can actually just kind of press down on the flower and it will flatten that peak quite a bit. So we're going to leave that layer solid. Your next layer, the not quite navy layer, you could use your crystal effects to adhere it just like this. Your profile of your flower will be pretty high if you do that. So what I do to try to make it a little bit shorter in terms of the height of the flower is I'm actually going to cut off the bottom of this flower. You just want to be careful because you don't want to cut off any of your petals, but if you just snip the bottom off, you'll end up with a bit of a hole here, which is fine, but now your profile is a little bit shorter. Now you'll be able to use some crystal effects to just adhere this layer to the one below it. So kind of line that up the way that you think is pretty and just let that sit. And crystal effects is forgiving. You'll be able to move it around a little bit before it dries, but it is pretty quick drying, which is nice for these flowers. And then we're going to go ahead with this next layer, and again I'm going to snip off the bottom to lower the profile of this flower. And again, we're going to use crystal effects on the bottom and adhere that, place that in the center exactly where you think it looks best. And this layer we already cut off part of the bottom, so I think that that height will be fine. So I'm just going to put some crystal effects. If you feel it's too high, you can always cut off a little bit more. Just be careful since you don't want to lose any of your petals. And then last but not least is our tiny piece. Again, if you need to cut off a little bit more, great, I think we'll be fine. You just want to put a little bit of crystal effects on the end, and then you're going to tuck it right in the center of that flower, like so. And you can let this dry for a bit. I tend to not have a lot of patience and I like to decorate them pretty quickly. So what I like to do, maybe you can see that this one's a little bit sparkly. What I've done is in a little spray bottle, I've put a mixture of rubbing alcohol and the champagne mist shimmer paint, and you just need a few drops of shimmer paint. It goes a really long way, and I place it in the bottle with a whole bunch of rubbing alcohol, and this acts as a great little glitter spray. And what I do is I use a little plastic container and I place my flower in that plastic container, and you want to just shake this up because the paint has a tendency to settle on the bottom of the container, and then I give it like 4 or 5 good sprays, just like so. Hopefully you can see that nice and shimmery, and just let it dry. And that's it. You can make these flowers in different sizes. So here are a couple where I did 4 layers instead, but used different numbers of petals, so they look a little bit different than these ones. And then I went ahead and used our really large scallop. This is the Scallop's number 2 die, and I used the larger scallop on the Scallop's number 2 die and went ahead and built a flower again the same way, just a little bit bigger scallops. You can use these on your cards as embellishments, as I've done here. You can also use them on gift wrap or home decor. I'm sure you can think of a ton of ways to play around with these flowers. I hope you've enjoyed this project, and I look forward to seeing you again soon here in the craft room.